Well, I learn something every day, or I try to. And I'm drawing today with two pens, a Waterman and a Skyline. And I'm testing them out for someone who is probably going to buy one of them. And due to a miscalculation on my part, I had sent him a pen that I hadn't fully tested out. And there was a problem with it, so I just want to make sure that there isn't a problem with these. So I am going to be drawing with these today, probably trying to draw the same thing twice, like I did just now with this birch tree. And of course, I know that the drawings are not going to be identical because I'm drawing with two different pens and I'm drawing two different times, even if it's just separated by a few minutes. You know, the shadows change and my mood changes and everything else changes. The world spins on its axis and rays from outer space are hitting me in a different angle, so who knows what's changing. But I did learn something today about these two pens, and this one, the Waterman, I drew first, and its nib is very fine, and I hold it in a particular way, and I'm trying to now describe to you how I hold this pen. It has a slightly, if I could say, slightly shaped nib that I'm going to use this art gum to try to show you what the end of the nib looks like. Pretend this is the ball of iridium at the end, and in the middle of this there's a slit for the ink to go down. And of course this is magnified 1,000,000 times, or some amount of times. And the shape of it is slightly elongated, I think. It feels that way, and it sort of looks that way. The side stroke is thinner than the downstroke. Now what this does, because of its shape, it tells me, I understand that if I'm lifting up on one side or the other, I'll know, because it sort of has this sweet spot it wants to be in. And if I were to lift up with it on a side more than the other side, it'll start skipping because it's not hitting the ground evenly. Both of the tines have to hit. And a fine nibbed pen that never has that problem because the point is so small it can't help but hit. But a nib that's slightly elongated or large and round, you really do have to be aware of how you're holding the pen and how it hits on the page. Now this should come, if you write with the pen any length of time, it'll become second nature to you and you don't have to think about it. You just draw with it or write with it. But this one, because of the shape of the nib, it sort of helps you find that sweet spot, I think. And this is just what I'm thinking right now. I may change my mind about it later. The Skyline nib, on the other hand, this is the Waterman nib, iridium, slightly shaped. The Skyline nib, on the other hand, its ball at the end is almost spherical. It's really nice because I'm able to sort of push the pen in any direction and it'll write. But if I don't have it placed on the page exactly the right way, it'll skip like it's doing here because the slit isn't hitting the paper. The slit between the two tines has to hit the paper to write. So this one is perfectly fine. You just have to keep making sure that you're holding it the right way, and it does not have this little sweet spot sort of thing telling you, because it's more spherical. And so you just have to be, I think, more aware when you hold the pen in your hand and you set it down to write. You have to be aware of how you're holding it, and you shouldn't have a problem. But if I take my hand away and I move around and I start drawing, holding it to the side like this rather than like that, I may get areas that skip. So I have to just, again, pay attention to what I'm doing when I put the pen down. And the pen, if you look at the nib and you look at the angle of the pen and you look at the breather hole on the nib, you shouldn't have any difficulty finding that spot. It's obvious when you look at it. It's just if you're not looking at it and you're looking at the tree and you're looking at the clouds and you're looking at whatever you're drawing, you may end up rotating this thing a little bit and then getting to a point when it doesn't write because the slit isn't hitting the paper. Again, this pen, I wasn't having that problem so much because even though it can exist, but because the nib is slightly shaped, it pushed it leveled itself, I think. Now, this all might just be, I'll just turn this into my brain. This is just like the image of the pen nib. This is 1,000,000 times the size of my brain. And there's a brain cell right here that's supposed to be in charge of what I'm doing. And sometimes that one little thing isn't firing as well, and I'll start drawing and it'll skip, and okay, I have to hold it this way. Most of the time, again, when I take a pen out to draw, I make a couple of marks, or I know the pen that I'm going to be using, and I don't have to make those marks. I can just start drawing. But as I draw, and as I move things around, I may have to say, oh yeah, I remember this pen, I have to hold it this way, or I have to do it this way, or I have to draw with it pulling down rather than pushing up. And because of these pens, each one of these is unique. There's no two that are alike, and there's no two drawings I make are alike either. They're, because I drew this one second, drew this one first and drew this one second, I already was bored. So I'm making up ways to keep it exciting for me. And I once learned I was going to draw something for 10 seconds and 20 seconds and 30 seconds and 40 seconds and see, how differently the drawings would look. But because I was drawing the exact same thing, I wasn't learning anything about the object I was drawing. And it was a flawed experiment, just like this is a flawed one. Because I'm drawing the same exact thing, I'm either bored, or I know what I'm doing, or I'm bored and I know what I'm doing, or the Earth is rotating on its axis and I'm being hit by death rays and my mind changes. It's viewpoint. So it's very hard to compare apples and oranges, I guess, when you're drawing the same thing. So I'm going to keep these pens in my pocket for the weekend. I'm going to, probably have other pens in my pocket too, but I just want to make sure that both of these are going to be fine when they go out to the prospective next owner of them, or of one of them. And I just want to make sure that I'm not making the overlooking something that I overlooked when I sent him the first set of pens. And but I am learning as I do this. I'm learning how I can articulate to you and to other artists of the world what is interesting about using a pen like this, or like this, or like this. they do require some, here's my brain again, some amount of brain to be aware of what you're doing. Rarely do you have a pen that just doesn't require any thinking. You do have to, within just a few strokes maybe just even, there's a friend of mine who is a friend of mine still. He's not, was, but he is a friend of mine, and he would look at a pen nib with his eyeballs. He would do this on his fingernail to sense this flexibility, and he would put a dot on the page. And by doing those three things, looking, doing that, and doing that, he was able to, the next thing he did, he would come up with this beautiful calligraphic line. But he knew that he could do that based on the look, the touch, and the dot he made. The dot he made was all he needed to do. He didn't have to, do these sorts of lines first. He just went from there, here to there, to the paper with that dot, and then he would make that line. And he's brilliant. His brain is even bigger than mine, and he was able to sense that. I need to try out, I need to experiment a little bit to get my brain and my hand functioning together. Brain, hand, pen, nib to function together. It might just take 10 seconds or so to remind me. If it's a pen I've used before, to remind me what it can do. If it's a pen I've never used before, it may take 30 seconds for me to sort of have a sense of what it can do. But this one, because of the shape of the nib, you just have to be aware that the big ball at the end has to be orientated correctly so that both tines are hitting the paper in order to get the line you want. So I'm learning something every day. That's what I learned today. I think I knew that before. I knew that certainly when it comes to stub nibs. That's the most obvious time when you need to make sure that the pen is hitting the paper. When the pens are finer, you don't have that problem. When the pens have a big ball at the end, you do have that problem. And the big ball versions are the hardest, really, to know that they're oriented correctly, because they don't have that, you can't see it as well. They don't have that flat shape. You can tell here which way you have to hold it, but when it's a sphere, you can't as easily. So you have to look at the nib and look at the line and make sure your hand and your paper and your nib are all lined up. So there you go.